Swain has a very high win rate in solo queue, but most players don't understand why it works. He thrives in extended fights, drains entire teams, and turns chaos into guaranteed wins. In this guide, I'll show you Swain's most reliable combos, his strongest builds, and how to play fights so you always come out ahead. Let's get into it. So what actually gives Swain such a high win rate? Swain wins because his kit is designed to dominate extended fights and punish frontline heavy teams. And the first strength that explains this is his ability to shred tanks. Swain's itemization and ability scaling let him melt high health targets over time. Once Swain turns on his ultimate, he becomes extremely difficult to force out of fights. One well-timed E or long-range W is often enough to catch someone out and start a winning fight. Swain can flex between damage, bruiser or tankier builds depending on what the game demands. Swain continuously gains power as the game goes on, with clear spikes once he completes 2 to 3 items. He clears waves quickly and safely, giving him strong control over tempo and resets. The harder the enemy commits into Swain, the more value he gets out of extended fights. When all of this comes together, Swain isn't just a burst mage or a frontline tank, he's a battle strategist. He wins by controlling how fights play out. Now let's look at Swain's weaknesses. Swain has no dashes or movement tools, so poor positioning is heavily punished. His E and W largely decide his lane and pick potential, and missing them limits his pressure. Swain struggles to start fights on his own and often relies on teammates to engage first. Despite having long-range abilities, Swain needs to play relatively close to deal real damage. Poor spell usage can cause mana problems early, which is also when Swain is most vulnerable to falling behind. Champions that kite well can prevent Swain from sticking to targets and sustaining through fights. Without his ultimate, Swain's threat in extended fights drops significantly. These weaknesses aren't fixed, they're solved through ability usage. So let's break down Swain's kit and the key tricks you can apply right away. Let's break down Swain's abilities and how to get real value out of them right away. Swain pulls soul fragments from enemies hit by certain abilities to permanently gain health over the course of the game. This is what makes Swain naturally tanky. As long as fights keep happening, he keeps getting harder to kill. Swain fires bolts in a cone that deal more damage the closer he is to the target. Q is Swain's main wave clear tool thanks to its AoE, low cooldown and manageable mana cost. You can also use Swain Q to check brushes. If it hits someone hidden in fog, you'll hear a static-like sound even if you don't see them. Swain places a long-range zone that damages, slows, reveals enemies, and pulls a soul fragment from the champion's hit. W is hard to land on its own, so use it when enemies are already locked into action. You can also use W to cut off escape paths, forcing enemies to either run through it or back into your team. The vision on W makes it great for checking brushes, objectives, and even spotting the enemy jungler across the map. Swain throws out a projectile that returns and roots enemies hit, and on recast pulls them in while granting a soul fragment. E is Swain's main setup ability. Once it lands, you can reliably follow up with your other spells. After landing E, drop W first, then recast it to pull them closer to the center so they have less time to escape. Because the pull brings enemies closer, it also sets up stronger Q damage at close range. Throwing E at an angle in lane makes it harder for enemies to sidestep compared to casting it straight on. Here's something a lot of players don't realize. Swain's E doesn't always pull enemies towards you. If they're already on top of you, when you recast it, it actually pushes them away, which can help create space against melee champs. It can pull enemies through thin walls, which is huge for catching immobile champions and pulling them completely out of position. You can also use E to check brushes. It reveals enemies hit, making it a strong scouting tool just with a longer cooldown than Q. Swain transforms, draining health from nearby enemies while dealing damage around him. He can then recast his ultimate to deal burst damage and slow enemies, consuming stored power. In extended fights, Swain's ultimate can refresh, allowing you to use Demon Flare more than once. Swain's ultimate is the strongest when enemies are grouped or fully committed to a fight. You can also use R as a bait tool, turning fights when enemies think they can finish you off. Demonic Ascension continues to drain even if you're crowd controlled or using items like Zhonya's. Holding Demon Flare until enemies try to escape lets you slow them and keep them inside your ultimate longer. For ability order, you want to max Q first. It's your main wave clear tool and your most reliable source of damage in fights. Max W second for the increased damage, stronger slow, and lower cooldown. E is maxed last since it doesn't reduce cooldown and is mainly used for utility to set up your Q and W. And of course, put points in your ultimate whenever it's available. Swain's combos aren't about speed, they're about timing. Once you understand when to commit, these combos let you punish mistakes and take over extended fights. Catch out combo, W into E. This combo is all about forcing movement and punishing it. Start with W to slow or zone them, then throw E towards the edge where enemies try to sidestep. The best case, you catch them, worst case, they're forced to walk into you. This works best in tight areas where enemies don't have many escape options. Main trade combo, E into W into E into Q. This is Swain's bread and butter trade and you'll use it all game. Once E lands, drop W in front of the enemy, then recast E to pull them toward the center so they can't escape. Finish with Q for maximum damage. It looks simple, but the timing on E and W consistently is what separates good Swains from the great ones. Full ultimate combo, E into W into R into E into Q into R. This is Swain's main all-in combo once you hit level 6. Landing E first is key. It locks enemies in so they can't dash away and waste your ultimate. After that, activate R, pull them back in, and keep them inside your damage as long as possible. Ultimate engage versus immobile targets. R into Q into R into E into W into E into Q. Against immobile champions, you can start with your ultimate to get Demon Flare ready faster. Once they're slowed, it becomes much easier to land E and trap them inside your damage. You don't need to memorize these combos, just remember your goal is to keep enemies as close to you as possible for as long as possible. If you do that, Swain can easily turn fights and even win outnumbered skirmishes. Q into Flash. You can also preload Q and Flash to reposition for instant damage. Flash Burst. R into Flash into Q. Most players don't expect burst from Swain, but this catches people off guard. With your ultimate already active, flash in, Demon Flare, then finish off with Q. Redirect catch. E into Flash into W into E into Q. You can cast E, then flash mid-flight to redirect it and catch enemies who think they've dodged. This is great for clutch catches and surprise picks. AoE engage slow. R into Flash into R. If enemies are grouped, flash into Demon Flare for a massive AoE slow so your team can follow up. You won't use these last few flashes every game, but knowing them makes Swain far more dangerous with flash. Unlike champions with fixed builds, Swain adapts to the game. So instead of copying pasting a setup, I'll show you how to choose the right runes and items for the situation. This is the most reliable rune in mid. Summon Aerie is my default rune page on Swain, especially into range or skill shot lanes. It gives you consistent poke early, extra value on long range Qs, and it continues to proc multiple times during extended fights and your ultimate. What makes Aerie strong is that it doesn't lock you into full AP. You can play poke early, scale safely, and still pivot into tankier setups later if the game calls for it. Conqueror is for matchups where you can actually stay in the fight, usually into melee mids or short range champions that can't disengage easily. Here's a simple example Conqueror page for Swain mid. If you're able to auto, drain, and keep Conqueror stacked, Swain becomes very hard to deal with. But if you're getting poked out or kited, this rune loses a lot of value. Phase Rush is the kiting and safety rune. I take this into matchups where positioning matters more than damage, like against heavy gank pressure or champions that want to run you down. You're giving up damage early, but you're buying freedom, and that freedom keeps your ultimate active longer. For Phase Rush, you can use the same baseline page as Aerie, you're just swapping out the keystone. Because Swain adapts to the game, your items can shift between heavy AP, bruiser, or tanky setups depending on what you're facing. Doran's Ring is your standard start. Lost Chapter is your first real goal, and once you have it, you can spam Q without going From there, Swain's mythic and legendary items are about staying relevant in the fight, not rushing damage. Blackfire Torch is one of the most common early AP options. It fits Swain's slow extended fights and gives you consistent damage over time. Leandry's pairs naturally with Swain, long fights, tankier targets, and enemies that can disengage. Zhonya's is one of Swain's most important items. It lets you fully commit with your ultimate, stall cooldowns, and survive being focused. Rylai's isn't about damage, it's about keeping people inside your ultimate. Against heavy AD or auto attackers, Frozen Heart gives massive value and lets Swain stay in fights far longer. Against AP heavy or poke heavy champs, Force of Nature is one of the strongest defensive options Swain can buy. Spirit Visage can work when you want to amplify healing, but it's more situational. Swain's boot choice is very flexible. You take what the game actually demands. Mercury Treads are your go-to against heavy AP or lots of crowd control. Plated Steel Caps are strong into AD heavy teams or auto attack threats. Sorcerer's Shoes are for games where you already have frontline and want to maximize damage. Boots of Swiftness can work into teams with lots of slows and when you need extra sticking power in fights. The common thread with all of these items is simple. Swain doesn't need to rush damage. If you stay alive longer, you deal more damage. Swain's summoner spells are about pressure versus presence. Teleport is the standard choice on Swain in most matchups. It lets you farm safely, play side lanes, and still join teamfights, giving you constant global pressure. Ignite is a lane-focused option. You take it when you're looking to punish melee or short-range matchups and snowball early kills. You're trading global pressure for threat kill, so if the lane doesn't break open, Ignite loses value fast. Ghost is about staying attached in fights. It helps Swain keep up during his ultimate and stay on targets once fights break out. The downside is simple, you give up teleport. So Ghost is only worth it if you expect constant extended fights instead of side lane play. If you're unsure, take teleport. Ignite and Ghost are situational tools when you're more experienced, not defaults. With that covered, let's get into how Swain actually plays in game. At level 1, Swain usually wants to start E. It gives you long range threat, pick potential, and early soul stacks. That said, there's one important exception. If your team gets into an early fight, Q can be much stronger. It has AoE damage, a low cooldown, and can be spammed multiple times in a level 1 skirmish. In those early fights, repeated Q casts plus auto attacks can deal surprising damage. In lane, start auto attacking the wave early, especially against champions with strong wave clear. At level 2, take Q into melee matchups or W into range matchups, and look for simple E into W trades. To save mana, only use W when E lands. Missing W early is very expensive. Once you hit level 3, you can start using full E into W into Q trades, and landing a couple of these is often enough to threaten an all-in. Mana can be an issue early if you spam spells without landing them, but this mostly disappears once you complete Lost Chapter. Pushing waves early lets you move first to river skirmishes and help your jungler contest fights. If you want to encourage ganks instead, freezing the wave can be very effective. When playing with your jungler, try to chain crowd control. Let them go first, then follow up with E and W. After level 6, you don't need to push waves as aggressively. Freezing closer to your tower gives you more room to chase and get value from extended fights. Swain isn't the fastest roamer, but he has strong presence around the river. Keep vision up and look to assist fights with long range W or catch enemies moving between lanes. Early skirmishes around Herald and Dragon are ideal for Swain. Enemies are more likely to group, which lets you fully leverage your AoE damage and sustain fights. This is where Swain really starts to take over the game. With 2 to 3 items, you have enough damage to threaten squishies and shred frontliners, so you should constantly be looking for picks. Catching even one enemy with E or W can completely open the map, giving your team space to take objectives. Mid-game fights around river, jungle, and epic monster pits are ideal for Swain. There's limited vision, tight terrain, and plenty of angles to catch players off guard. Use control wards and swap to a sweeper to deny vision and increase your chances of finding picks. In fights, your goal is to stay close enough to keep your ultimate active without overcommitting too early. You don't want to blindly run into 5 enemies. Instead, look to chunk or catch someone first, then commit once you've created an advantage. Landing W or E before a fight often decides whether the fight is winning or losing. When enemies are grouped, aim your abilities to hit multiple targets. Swain's AoE damage can quickly turn fights in your favor. With defensive items like Zhonya's, you can engage, soak pressure, then stall while your team follows up. Swain has strong skirmishing potential and can often win 1v2s if enemies walk into him one at a time. Swain's side lane pressure comes from how hard he is to remove. When enemies chase him, they give up the map, and that's where Swain wins games. If you draw 2 or more enemies to deal with you, it often creates opportunities elsewhere on the map for your team. Late game plays similarly to mid game, but mistakes are punished much harder. Most teams will have healing reduction and more defensive options, so positioning and target selection becomes more important than raw damage. Continue looking for picks. A single catch with E or W can instantly decide the game. Pay attention to enemies without flash or key cooldowns, as they're much easier to punish in late fights. Objective fights around Baron and Elder are especially strong for Swain due to tight terrain and limited escape routes. When your team lacks a true frontline, building tankier and soaking pressure can be more valuable than chasing damage. Not every fight needs to be forced. If a fight turns bad early, backing off and surviving can be more important than dying. It lets you wave clear and set up for the next fight. Swain is excellent at cleaning up fights, zoning carriers with W, and finishing low health targets from range. Matchups on Swain are less about winning lane outright, and more about how much pressure you can absorb and return. This is how they generally feel for Swain in solo queue. These are lanes where Swain feels comfortable and stable. The enemy struggles to meaningfully threaten you early, and extended trades favor you heavily. You can farm safely, trade with Q and passive pools, and slowly drain opponents who misposition or overcommit. They often lack the burst or mobility needed to punish you before your sustain kicks in. In these matchups, you're rarely under kill pressure. The lane naturally slows down. Enemies who chase trades tend to lose them. Your goal here isn't to force kills, it's to stay healthy, build towards your items, and let the lane play itself. Once you reach 6, these matchups often become very difficult for the enemy to interact with at all. These are comfort lanes. If you play patiently, the enemy slowly loses control without realizing it. These lanes are highly dependent on timing, spacing, and jungle pressure. Both champions have real windows, and mistakes on either side can swing the lane quickly. You don't win these matchups by forcing all-ins, overusing abilities, taking extended trains at the wrong time. Swain wins these lanes by choosing the right moments, pulling them when the enemy commits, disengaging when cooldowns are down, and avoiding unnecessary damage early. Here, wave control matters, jungle tracking matters, over-aggression is punished. If you manage health and cooldowns well, these lanes often stabilize, and once fights start breaking out, Swain's value usually increases. These are decision lanes. Patience and discipline matter more than raw pressure. These are lanes that break Swain's normal rhythm. The enemy can outrange you, disengage easily, or punish positioning mistakes before your sustain can matter. You are not trying to win lane outright here. Your priority is survival, wave control, and minimizing losses. Avoid forced trades, hold abilities defensively, and don't commit unless the enemy makes a clear mistake. In these matchups, you give up lane dominance, you trade pressure for safety, you focus on staying relevant, not winning early. If the lane doesn't go your way, your win condition shifts. Push safely, then impact fights, skirmishes, and objectives where Swain's presence matters more than lane control. These lanes are playable, but only if you stay calm and let the game open up naturally. Once you understand which category you're in, Swain becomes much easier to play, not because the lane changes, but because your expectations do. Mid lane teaches you all of Swain's core fundamentals. When you take him to other roles, you're not relearning the champion, you're just adapting to different lane constraints. Most fundamentals from mid still apply, but top lane is far more punishing. You'll usually be into melee matchups, so starting Q is often best for early trading and wave control. For runes, Conqueror is your best default into most top laners for damage and sustain, while Phase Rush is better against mobile or range picks like Vayne, or when you need kiting and chase potential. Teleport becomes a safer second summoner, letting you recover from bad trades and apply global pressure. In some matchups, Ghost plus TP can replace Flash, helping you stay on top of enemies while your ultimate is active. Top lane has a longer lane and almost no escape routes. If you miss W or E, you're extremely vulnerable to ganks and dives, so expect to be targeted. Early defensive boots or resolve secondary runes can make dives survivable. Once you hit level 6, your threat skyrockets. All-ins become dangerous for the enemy, and even dives are risky. Look to chain CC with your jungler, letting them CC first, and take Herald whenever there's an opening. Be cautious with early teleports to Dragon. Only match it if the enemy top laner also commits and you're confident the fight is winning. Otherwise, take plates and farm. Use W frequently to scout jungle paths and mid roams. Most Swain fundamentals still apply, but your role shifts towards pressure, setup, and vision. Run Electrocute and you'll start the support item. Poke consistently to stack that item quickly, then swap to Sweeper and Control Vision with Control Wards. You can proc Electrocute easily with E into auto attack into E2. Your goal in lane is to pressure space, not just land the abilities. Threatening E alone forces enemies back, giving your ADC room to farm. Synergize with your ADC CC, let them engage first, then follow up with EWQ. At level 6, you often become the frontline, initiate with E, then ultimate, and peel aggressively with W, E, and Demon Flare when your ADC is focused. With lower gold and XP, your sustain is weaker, so avoid solo engages unless a teammate has already committed. Use W constantly for jungle tracking, mid scouting, and objective setups, and join river and dragon skirmishes whenever possible. For AP bot lane Swain, follow the guide exactly as mid. The fundamentals don't change. The main difference is lane synergy. You'll always dominate with heavy CC supports like Alistar, Pantheon, or Nautilus, as long as you layer CC properly. Always wait for their CC first. Mistimed abilities can knock enemies out of your W or E and ruin trades. Everything you've learned about spacing extended fights and objective skirmishes transfers directly here. That's everything you need to start winning on Swain. Not by copying builds, but by adapting to the game in front of you. If this helped, consider subscribing. I'm Zeus, and I'll see you in the next one.